One thing I know about you and one thing I know about me is that all of us desire more peace in our life. All of us want a greater sense of financial security in our life. All of us in this room, if we're married, want a happy marriage. We all want to live in a happy household. All of us want a sense of well-being. We want a sense of feeling fulfilled. All of us really want the same thing. And if I told you I have the keys to get you all of those things, wouldn't you want to know what it is? Wouldn't you want to know what it is that will help you have a better marriage, better financial stability, more peace in your heart, a greater home life, greater relationships, just an overall better sense of life? If I had the answer to all of that, wouldn't you want to know what the answer is? I, in fact, do have the answer, and the information I'm going to give you is not new. In fact, success in all of these areas is closer than you might think. But as soon as I begin to share the solutions to bring you the answers to all of these situations that you and I live with on a daily basis, a tension's going to rise up on the inside of you. There's going to be a tension, and the tension is this: I'm going to start to tell you things you already know. And the tension is because you already know them, but you've never done anything about what you know. So it's not new information, it's just simply unused information. As soon as you're thinking about losing weight, and you got to get on a diet and an exercise program, the whole kind of thing, you already know what you're supposed to do. Then some dietitian stands up before you and says, well, this is the healthy food portion. This is what you should eat. This is your caloric intake for the day. Then all of a sudden you feel mad because you can't eat pizza 3 meals a day, right? Speaking of pizza, Southern California, Robin and I were exposed to Vietnamese culture. I love the diversity of our country. We had boba and banh mi. Anybody had either of those before? Give me pizza. Baby, I'm just telling you, give me pizza. It was good, but I don't wake up in the morning going, man, I just got to get some banh mi today. I just got to have some boba. But I do sometimes dream about pizza. Anyway, where are we going here? But the information I'm going to share with you, you already know this information. When it comes to managing your finances, you probably already have tons of information about managing finances. You just ignore it. You haven't done anything with it. And so then anytime somebody starts talking about good financial stewardship, financial planning, all of a sudden this tension rises up on the inside of you. Because here's the tension that you deal with and I deal with. I want control. I want to do what I want to do. Isn't that true for you? That's true for me. The message I'm sharing with you this morning is really birthed out of your pastor's heart. I'm sharing with you my struggles, and if you struggle with any of these things, it'd be great to pat me on the back after the service and say, that's exactly where I live too. And what we ultimately need to do is trust God. Now, trust is difficult for us. I mean, we've trusted people that we can see, and those people have betrayed us and hurt our feelings. And so it's difficult for us to wrap our minds around trusting this God whom we've never seen before. And ultimately, that's where our relationship with Him exists. That's where it grows. I mean, in all of us, in our relationships with God, the option we all have is either to trust Him or not trust Him. And to trust Him demands that we live a risky lifestyle. That these risky behaviors with God can lead to places of success in our life. I love what Psalm 37 says. This is not the main story I'm going to share with you. Just kind of starting out here in Psalm 37, beginning in verse number 3. Look what the psalmist says in this verse. Look at this. Trust in the Lord and do good. And then look at the results. Then you will live safely in the land and prosper. How many want to prosper? Say, yeah. All right, now, this isn't necessarily financial prosperity, but it could be. It could also be a marriage prosperity. It could be a home life prosperity. It could be a peace in your heart prosperity. It could be all those kinds of things, but we just kind of want to gloss over the trust in the Lord thing. Yeah. All we see when we read this is, I just want to prosper. Look what he says in the next verse. He says, look, take delight in the Lord. Now pause right there. Delight, I realize, is a word that we don't use very often. I'm going to take delight in my meal after church today. We don't say stuff like that. It really means this, that God is my priority. He says, take delight in the Lord, and He will give you your heart's desire. How many like that? I mean, when we read that, come on, we read that with the sin nature inside of us that says, heart's desire. You know what my heart's desire is? A Harley Davidson. Oh, God, give me a Harley. And God's going, whoa, wait a minute. What about delighting me first? Yeah, that's great. I just want the Harley, right? Next verse, look what he says. Commit everything you do to the Lord, and then there's that T word again, trust Him, and He'll help you. I mean, this is a no-brainer. Why wouldn't we trust? Why wouldn't we delight? Why wouldn't we commit? Because every time we do, the outcome benefits us. Why wouldn't we do it? I'll tell you why we wouldn't do it, because we want to control stuff. We don't want to live risky. We don't want to trust Him. Oh, we'll trust Him when we have to, but until then, I want to be in control. Okay. What does that look like for us? Jesus tells a great story. Turn in your Bible if you want to follow along to Matthew 25. Matthew is the first gospel. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You'll find the first book in the New Testament part of your Bible. Matthew chapter 25. This story is relating to end-time events, but I want to draw from it the principle inside the story. Now, Jesus tells this amazing story. Jesus, the master communicator. And every time you read one of the parables that Jesus tells, you always have to say, who am I in the story and who is Jesus in the story? Who am I in the story? Who is Jesus in the story? This story has four main characters. There's a landowner, and then there's three slaves or employees or whatever you want to call them. Four main characters. In the story, the landowner is obviously Jesus. And then the three landowners, well, that would be us. And ultimately, the story really surrounds just one of those servants in the story. So let's draw the principle from this story about living a risky life in the presence of God. Verse number 14, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. This is not uncommon in Jesus' day. There was very wealthy people and very poor people. The very wealthy people, they were the landowners, the business owners. He wants to expand his empire. In order to do that, I need to go on a trip, network with some other people. While I'm gone, I'm going to entrust my assets to my employees. So he goes on this long trip. He called together his servants and he entrusted the money to them while he was gone. This would have been very common. They understood this whole thing. Look what he entrusts them with in verse 15. He gave 5 bags of silver to one. Pause right there. Your version of the Bible might say talents. If it does say talent, that doesn't mean he could tap dance really well. Okay, that's not a kind of a talent we're talking about. We're talking about a unit of money. 1 talent. He gets 5. 1 talent was equal to 6,000 denarii. 1 denarii is a day's wages. So 1 talent would be worth 6,000 days of wages. That's a lot of money, let alone 1 talent. This guy gets 5. How much money could you earn in 30,000 days of employment? A lot of money. You're probably not going to live that long, but I'm just saying it's a lot of money, okay? So he gave him 5 bags of silver. To another he gave 2, and then another to the last he got 1. 5, 2, and 1. And then he divides it according to their abilities. And then he left on his trip. Now, don't get caught up on the abilities thing. This isn't saying that 2 of the guys were better than the other guy. This is simply an illustration of the individuality in the personal relationship this guy has with his servants. He knew them well. He knew what they were capable of doing. He knew what they couldn't do. And so based upon that, it had nothing to do with giftedness. This is their ability. He knew them well. Our Father knows us well. He will never give us more or demand more of us than we can give or do for Him. Well, the story plays out for us. The story plays out for us in verse 16. The servant who received 5 bags of silver, he began to invest the money, and he earned 5 more. How many want that guy working for you, right? Next verse number 17. The servant who got 2 bags of silver, he went to work, he earned 2 more. So it's looking really good in this story so far. And as you're reading this story, if you have never read this before, naturally, all right, great. We know what happened to the first guy, know what happened to the second guy. The assumption is when we get to the third guy, he gets 1 bag of silver. The assumption is he took that 1 bag of silver and turned it into 1 more. That's the assumption, isn't it? But verse 18 says, but the servant who received the 1 bag of silver, he digs a hole in the ground and he hides his master's money. Can you imagine this? This guy had the ability, just like the other two guys. He had the ability to turn the one bag into two bags. And the employer knew it. The landowner knew it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given it to him. He knew what he could do. He knew his potential. He knew the possibilities, but he buries it in the ground. And we're going to understand as we read the story, the motivator for burying it in the ground was not concerned over his master's money. He wasn't trying to preserve his master's money. He was trying to preserve himself. Scared. There was fear in this guy. He was not willing to risk any amount of money. His actions really reveal a lack of trust. And you know why there was a lack of trust? You know why he didn't trust the landowner? I think this is the reason he buried the money in the ground. I think it was because he didn't know the landowner. There was no relationship with the landowner. If he had known the relationship with the landowner, if he knew his heart, if he knew this guy that he worked for, if he really knew him, he knew that he could make a mistake and still be accepted. But he didn't know him. And the story illustrates this. The Father gives us stuff. The Heavenly Father gives us stuff. He gave His Son Jesus to us. He entrusted more than 5 bags of silver to us. He gave His one and only Son to us. He entrusted Him with His Son long before we did anything for Him. Here's what I know. The more I know God, the more I know His Son, Jesus Christ, the more I know that I can live my life by faith, the more I know that I can take risks, the more I know that I can live by faith, the more that I know that if I commit, if I trust and delight in God, He's got my back. Do you think I'm a little bit scared about what's going on outside the walls of this church? When I came here 7 years ago, if you would have said, Pastor Chris, you're going to build this church, I would have said, I'm going to go find another church to pastor. But God brings you into these situations. And why are we going ahead with this? Because I know that as long as I trust the Lord, as long as you trust the Lord's going to build the house, not the hands of man. God's going to have our back. God's going to take care of us in those situations. Because I know God. If I don't know God, the more I move away from God, the scarier it all becomes. Well, you know the master in the story is going to come back, don't you? He does in verse 19. After a long time, their master returned from his trip. And he calls them in to give an account of how they have used the money. Now, you know what the third guy's already done with the money, so you don't want to go any further in the story, do you? Let's just not go. It's like, have you ever watched a movie? Come on, you've all watched a movie that was kind of yucky, kind of scary. It kind of gets to this place in the story, and you've got your hand on the power button on the remote, and you kind of want to push the button, don't you? But you don't, right? Like you want to find out how this thing's going, but ooh, I hate the way it's going right now. That's exactly where we are in this story. Verse number 20. Well, the servant whom he'd entrusted the 5 bags of silver, he came forward with 5 more. If you had doubled your master's money, you'd come walking boldly into the office, wouldn't you? Like, hey, how you doing, boss? Look what I got you. 1, 2, it starts counting out 10 bags of silver right there. It's just an incredible thing. And he says, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I earned 5 more. Now, in the next verse that we're going to read here, you're going to see what Jesus rewards. And what Jesus rewards tells us what Jesus loves. What He rewards is what He loves. Look at verse number 21. Well, the master, he looks at this guy, and he was full of praise. Wouldn't you if you were a boss and had that kind of an employee? He said, well done, my good and faithful servant. You know what? All of us in this room can be good and faithful servants. Because all it takes to be good and faithful is this: doing the wise thing over and over and over and over again until you get the results that you need. It's just doing the right thing over and over and over when it's easy and when it's difficult. With your money, with your morality, with your marriage, with your business, with your heart, with your relationships, with your marriage. It's doing the right thing, the wise thing over and over and over and over again. That's being faithful. It's persevering through the most difficult times. And that's what this guy did. And you have to live a risky life, because if you want to live in the face of the morality and the culture that we live in, you know that you're taking a risk. You're taking a lot of risks. Well, look at the results. Look at the results. Verse number 21. You have been faithful in handling a small amount. This is the landowner. Imagine this. Like, you've done a good job. I gave you 5 bags. That's no small amount. I mean, that's millions of dollars. You doubled it for me. You were so good with a small amount. So you know what? I'm going to give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate. Come celebrate. Good time. And they started playing the mirror balls going and the whole thing. It was just awesome. Look at the results of doing the good and faithful things. The result of doing the good and faithful things is you get more things to be good and faithful for. All of us want more in our life. Come on, come on. We're all about upgrading, aren't we? You upgrade, you get more minutes, you get more data, you get more channels. Come on, we're all about more in America, aren't we, right? And here's what Jesus said. If you do the good and faithful things over and over, you get more. The problem is we want more, but we don't want to give more. Jesus says until you start to give more, you don't get more. We all want more money. Come on, look at your neighbor. You're looking at, they want more money. Just look at the person next to you. They want more money, right? Okay, you want more data on your cell phone plan, right? You want more data? You want more peace in your marriage? You want more peace in your marriage? You want more joy and happiness in your home? It takes doing the right thing over and over and over again, and then you get more. The principle is right there. Well, the second guy comes in. Hey, you gave me 2 bags, turn it into 2 more. Yay. And Jesus, well done, good and faithful servant. I'm going to make you, you've done well with just a little bit. Says the same thing as he did to the first guy. He says, and then come celebrate. Let's celebrate. That's what I love. Isn't it fun? I think there's going to be celebration in heaven. No mirror ball. Sorry for folks. Okay. And the story is great, but we've only gone through 2 servants. Remember the third guy, he buried the money down in the ground and yeah. So the first 2 guys walk out of the room now. And now it's just the third guy and the landowner. Awkward, okay? Verse 24 says, well, the servant with the 1 bag of silver, he came in and said, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. What does he mean by that? He calls him harsh. Harsh? Do you know how much he entrusted you with and then left? Do you know how much he put in your hands to do something with it? And you would get a slice of the profits. He put so much in your hands. What do you mean harsh? He wasn't harsh. I think he was generous. It's obvious to me that this guy had a completely different perspective of the boss than the other 2 guys did. You know what? I think the word that was from the Lord this morning was right on with what the word says right here. Some of you can blame God for the problems you go in your life. You can call God harsh and he's been mean to me and difficult and he's done this to me and made that happen and you can blame God. It's all perspective. 2 guys in the story thought the landowner was pretty generous to entrust them with all this money and they doubled it and made some more. The third guy obviously didn't know the landowner. So he hid the money in the ground. He just put it right there. He took 0 risks. And the motivation for his actions are now revealed in verse 25. I was afraid I would lose. Do you know why some of you are having financial problems today? Because you're afraid you're going to lose what little money you have. So you try to clutch it, hold on to it, hold it back, control it as much as you possibly can. Do you know why some of you are having problems with time management? Because you're not managing. You're so afraid you're not going to have enough time in the day. The problem is you're putting all the wrong stuff first and the right stuff gets left for second. Do you know why you're having problems in your marriage today? The problem arises because you're putting yourself first in the marriage instead of putting the home first in the marriage. Do you know why you're having problems as a parent today? Because you're putting your children up on this pedestal instead of putting God on the throne. That's why we're having problems in the home today, because you're unwilling to take the risk to release things to God, and it can be so easy to do that when you don't know the Father. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back. Brushes the dust off it, boom, down on the desk. I'm sure in his own mind he's thinking, well, at least I didn't squander it in wild living. I mean, you get your money back. I was afraid. And people are always afraid of losing time and afraid of releasing things to God that we need to release to God. Your children, your control, your family, your heart, your will. And then look at the landowner's response in verse 26. This is harsh. You wicked and, say that word with me, lazy servant. Ooh, that's kind of harsh, isn't it? He said, if you knew that I harvested crops I didn't plant, gathered crops I didn't cultivate, he says in the next verse, why didn't you just put my money in the bank and at least get some interest off it? I'll tell you why. Because I wasn't willing to risk anything. I wanted to control everything. You can always tell what a person controls in their life because it's probably dying. If your finances are dying, it's probably because you're in control. If your marriage is dying, it's probably because you demand control. If your heart is dying, it's probably because you have to be the one in charge. You can always tell what a person controls because it's probably dying, and ultimately, whatever we control, we kill. Well, Jesus' conclusion to his story now comes in verse 29. We're towards the end now. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they'll have an abundance. Come on, abundance. We all want abundance, right? Look at your neighbor. I like abundance, right? We love abundance. We all want abundance. So we think the way to abundance is to hoard, to control, to sit on, to possess. And so counter to that way of thinking, Jesus says the way to abundance is to commit, to delight, to trust. It goes so counterintuitive to the way we grow up. It's true that we all want that abundance. He goes on to say in the rest of that verse, from those who do nothing, even what little they have, will be taken away. It's a principle. It's a principle. Let me ask you this. We're just about done. What is it that seems to be slipping through your fingers time and time again? You can't hold a marriage together. You can't hold a family together. You can't seem to get the kids together. You can't seem to get finances together. There's always just a panic in the time management. What is it that you're not trusting over to the Lord and giving to the Lord and just letting him do his thing with it? I love the verses that we started with today in Psalm 37. So we're going to revisit 3 words today. We're going to revisit trust, delight, and commit. And then I'm going to give you what each of those words means, the definition for each of those. So the first one looks like this. What does it look like for us? What does risky behavior look like? It looks like this. Number one, we're going to trust. The definition of trust is what? Say it with me. Jesus first. The next thing that we need to do, number 2, delight. What's the definition of delight? Ready? Jesus first. Do you see a pattern here? You almost know where number 3 is going, don't you? Number 3, we're supposed to commit everything to Jesus, which means what? Jesus first. It's Jesus first with my home. It's Jesus first with my children. It's Jesus first with my giftings. It's Jesus first with the finances. It's Jesus first with everything. And the result of that is abundance and prosperity. And I'm not preaching a prosperity gospel. I'm just telling you, but that's the natural outcome for people who are obedient, who trust, delight, and